GitHub Copilot is an AI-powered coding companion that helps developers like yourself turn ideas into working code faster. Embedded directly in the tools that you're already using, it understands context from comments, open files, and project structure to then suggest code, generate functions, and explain unfamiliar patterns. Instead of starting from a blank screen or constantly searching for examples, developers can stay focused on solving problems while Copilot helps with the heavy lifting. Welcome to this course on GitHub Copilot, where you will gradually learn how to tackle these real-world developer and DevOps scenarios by using GitHub Copilot as your peer developer assistant. When developers and DevOps engineers like yourself start using GitHub Copilot, the impact on your work is higher productivity, better consistency, and more time spent on meaningful work. Copilot accelerates everyday tasks, reduces repetitive effort, and supports you at every skill level, without replacing your expertise or judgment. It acts as a collaborative partner, accelerating development, improving flow, and helping teams ship high-quality software with greater confidence and efficiency. I'll kick off this course with an introduction to generative AI, clarifying its architecture and how it underpins GitHub Copilot and several similar tools today, primarily setting the scene on its features, as well as positioning some license plan aspects. In Module 2, you'll learn about several GitHub Copilot baseline features, starting from how to enable it in your preferred development environment, how Copilot uses large language models or LLMs, as well as sharing details on the Microsoft and GitHub Responsible AI framework. And then once everything is up and running, we gradually increase the pace, starting with Module 3, which details several developer and broader DevOps or cloud engineer use cases. Module 4 focuses on unit testing. To close this video series with Module 5, covering more advanced scenarios that you can use, such as agent mode, MCP servers, and using the coding agent. My name is Peter de Tender, and I have been a lead technical trainer here at Microsoft since summer 2019. Initially joined the European trainers team, but managed to relocate to Redmond about 4 years ago to continue the role out of the Americas. In my role, I've primarily taught Azure architecture and Microsoft DevOps solutions classes with a strong focus on developing Azure solutions as well. And then over the last 18 months, this has shifted more towards Azure AI and GitHub course portfolio. Before I moved into the full-time Microsoft role, I ran my own company for about 10 years with a primary focus on Azure and Azure DevOps consulting and training workshops for global Microsoft customers and partners. Now, outside of work, I still like to share knowledge with technical communities through book writing, conference speaking, or blogging. Now, with a passion for technology, I actually do have non-technology related hobbies as well, especially bread baking or exploring the Pacific Northwest in my walking shoes or on my mountain bike. Now, I'm happily sharing my contact details here, so feel free to reach me by email or ping me on Teams, petender@microsoft.com, or maybe you want to connect through LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/PDTIT. While I hope this video course content will help you understand the different GitHub Copilot features, where I'll use a combination of slides together with an extensive set of live demos, know that you can continue your own learning at your own pace and in your own time using our Microsoft Learn platform. The baseline content used for these videos is split up into 2 parts, reachable from the following URLs: aka.ms/learn GH-300 Part 1 and Part 2. There are 9 modules in Part 1 and 6 in Part 2, consolidated into 5 videos. Another way to validate your GitHub Copilot skills is to take the GitHub certification exam. It targets anyone who wants to validate their ability to integrate, configure, and use existing developer and DevOps processes while leveraging generative AI with GitHub Copilot. Welcome to the first module, an introduction to GitHub Copilot. Get something to drink, add a little snack, and I would say let's get started. This first module's goal is to explore how GitHub Copilot can enhance productivity and security for any organization, to understand the features across GitHub Copilot Pro, Business, and Enterprise, and obviously to learn how to enable it. We'll also discuss the opportunities, risks, and responsibilities in using generative AI. Before talking about GitHub Copilot in all its glory, allow me to switch to my whiteboard for a few minutes to share some key aspects of generative AI. I use the whiteboard because it's not really part of the official learning path for this course. However, after delivering this course for over a year now, almost weekly, I found it clarified how Copilot actually works and where some of the flows originate. So the main topic is obviously generative AI, but let's take a few steps back, let's say about 60 years back in time, where we cannot talk about generative AI without thinking about traditional AI. Now, what is traditional AI? And some of you might be familiar with this, but one of the main features is document intelligence. So what that allows organizations to do is, for example, automating invoice processing or analyzing what maybe some of you like using Office 365 Copilot and relying on summaries. But that's again generative AI. So we're not there yet, but even years and years ago, we already used some of that intelligence. Another super popular one is compute vision. So that's basically recognizing objects. So the easiest example here is like showing a picture of a fruit basket where it would allow you to identify this is an apple, an orange, a banana. And then the other characteristic where I have a lot of cool stories, but not going to share them on the video, but using like language, using speech, text to speech, speech to text. Well, I'll share one easy example where I was working on a project years ago in Japan, and I needed to provide training in English to Japanese customers, and they were not always that fluent in English, but I was even less fluent in Japanese, and that's where we actually used like the Microsoft language translation, going back and forth, and actually worked out quite well. And then obviously the most important piece in traditional AI is machine learning. So that's really the data science part, where we have the data, we create models, and eventually allowing us to use document intelligence, vision, and language. Now, interesting enough, all the traditional AI technology, and again, simplifying it a bit like over the last 60 years, we need all of this to move to generative AI. Now, what is the characteristic of generative AI? One of the big ones, if you think about the launch of like OpenAI ChatGPT about 3 years ago, is natural language. And that means you can ask questions, you can run prompts that I'll talk about later on, using your natural language, even technically your native language. Obviously, generative AI also means that it's primarily generating context. It can generate code, probably a lot of examples on that throughout this course. It can generate images, a lot of examples on social media, and it's all based on prompting. Now, the flow of generative AI from prompt into getting a response is basically a pretty simplified diagram. In reality, it's a lot more complex, but it starts with input. So that's basically where you as the user, the developer, the DevOps engineer come in, and you're going to run a prompt. From there, it's moving into what I simplify here in the diagram, our generative AI engine. It's going to do a lot of magic. I got some other diagrams in another part of the course where I'm detailing a little bit more how the GitHub Copilot flow actually works. And then eventually we have prompt response, which would be output. Which could be code, which could be documentation, which could be a clarification of pretty much anything we ask for. Now, out of that generative AI, there's a few characteristics that I want to highlight here, where one of them is the large language model, or as we call it, the LLMs. Now, what is a large language model? It's basically machine learning based, where generative AI companies like Microsoft, like OpenAI with the GPT models, Anthropic with Claude, DeepSeek out of Asia, those are the vendors creating those large language models. Now there's two prime characteristics out of the large language model that I would like to highlight here. And the first one is that it's based on public internet trained data. So it's basically scraping the internet, moved all that knowledge into the large language model using that machine learning engine data science process behind the scenes. And obviously, since that information is coming from the public internet, it also needs quite some time in the massive data centers that we see popping up all over the globe. And that processing time is typically for now 12 to 18 months. It's also why later on you'll find out that you can run prompts in GitHub Copilot asking it about like the latest framework, and the latest will at that moment in time be the latest from like 12 to 18 months ago. So I hope for a lot of you who might be totally new to generative AI, it's going to help you a little bit seeing the broader picture. And during the presentation and demos later on, I'll try to refer back to some of these. GitHub Copilot is available in several plans that scale from individual developers all the way to enterprise organizations, with key differences in governance, security, and collaboration. While all plans integrate directly with popular development environments and obviously the github.com portal, the business and enterprise plans also offer organization-wide management capabilities. These include centralized policy control, zero data retention for code snippets, and support for enterprise networking requirements like VPN proxies, features that matter when Copilot is rolled out across your organization. The enterprise plan builds on this foundation by adding deeper collaboration and security integrations. It enhances pull request workflows with summaries, collaborative chat, and documentation support, helping teams review and understand changes faster. The benefit is clear. Individuals gain productivity boosts, while organizations gain the controls and the safeguards they need to adopt AI across their development lifecycle with confidence. One of the most significant impacts of GitHub Copilot is its ability to help developers stay in the flow. Studies and customer stories show that Copilot reduces interruptions and conserves mental energy by automating repetitive tasks, enabling developers to focus on solving meaningful business problems instead of constantly switching context or rewriting boilerplate code. Developers can stay focused and productive for more extended periods. This productivity translates directly into measurable outcomes. Teams report faster onboarding for new developers, quicker task completion, significant time saving on infrastructure and configuration work. Whether it's generating Terraform files or filling in implementation details, Copilot accelerates everyday development tasks, turning AI assistance into real, tangible efficiency gains. GitHub Copilot acts like an always available AI peer programmer, working alongside developers in the tools that you already use. With features such as inline code suggestions, Copilot chat, and command line assistance, it helps developers write, fix, and understand code without leaving the workflow. It can recognize errors, suggest corrections, and even generate unit tests, all in real time as code is being written. Beyond individual productivity, Copilot also supports collaborative development. In pull requests, it helps generate summaries and suggestions that developers can review and refine. Different subscription levels tailor this experience, from personal use to enterprise-grade access controls and internal code awareness. The result is faster development, with fewer interruptions, while still keeping developers firmly in control of the final output. Getting started with GitHub Copilot at the organization level is all about policy-driven access. Organization owners can decide whether Copilot is enabled for everyone, limited to selected user or teams, or entirely disabled. These controls are managed centrally, making it easy to align Copilot usage with company policies and compliance requirements. Once enabled, access can be adjusted over time as needs evolve. Administrators can fine-tune permissions, enforce policies, and confidently scale usage across teams. This approach ensures that Copilot adoption is intentional and controlled, helping organizations balance innovation with governance from day one. Next, setting up GitHub Copilot. Setting up GitHub Copilot is straightforward. Why? Because it's designed to fit naturally into your development workflow. After installing the Copilot extension in your development environment, like Visual Studio Code, which I will use for most of my demos later on, or in Visual Studio, IntelliJ, or Xcode for Mac, developers simply sign in with the GitHub account, and that's where the activation of the feature happens. From there, Copilot begins offering inline suggestions as code is getting written, requiring minimal configuration to get immediate value. Developers also retain complete control over how Copilot behaves. It can be enabled, can be disabled globally, or per language, and inline suggestions can be adjusted through your development environment settings. This flexibility allows each developer and each team in total to tailor the experience to how you work best without adding complexity. Interacting with GitHub Copilot feels natural because it works directly where you as a developer already write code. When you start typing, Copilot offers real-time suggestions that can be accepted or rejected, or why not refined using simple keyboard shortcuts. This makes experimentation easy and keeps you firmly in charge of what gets added into the codebase. Beyond inline suggestions, Copilot supports interactive chat and context-specific comments inside your editor. You as a developer can ask questions. You can request explanations. It helps you generating tests, or why not exploring alternative implementations, and you never need to leave the development environment. The benefits include faster learning, quicker problem solving, and less friction, turning AI assistants into a seamless part of your everyday development. So now that you have an introduction level understanding of what GitHub Copilot can do, let's switch to our demo environment, where I'm going to show you how to get started with the configuration settings in GitHub first, and then followed by how to set it up in Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio. So I'm going to start this first demo where I think most of your development or DevOps work starts, and that's your GitHub profile. So I'm authenticated here, and I'm going to navigate to my profile details, where I can go into settings, but since we're talking about Copilot, I'm going to use the straight option into Copilot settings. And this is going to show me a lot of different options. Now, I need to be a bit honest, since I talked about GitHub Copilot Enterprise, as you can see here, I'm using it, so that's the first part. in the list of settings where you can find out like what kind of license do I have, which by the way, if you don't have the license activated out of your organization, you don't even see this plate. Now I'm using GitHub Copilot Enterprise, but I'm just a user. So what it means is later on in some of the other parts of the demo and the presentation, when I'm talking about policies, I won't be able to show you because I cannot really modify those policies. But what's relevant here is how you can actually go through different settings and validating what kind of options do you have available. And I'm just quickly going to highlight a few of them where it might be relevant to validate what kind of billing plan are we using. And obviously you can imagine as a Microsoft employee, I'm using the Microsoft plan to do this. But then further down, you can actually tweak a little bit of the Copilot experience, where you can define what kind of features of Copilot, and we're going to talk about a lot of these throughout the different modules. Some of these might be defined individual for your profile. And then again, depending on the setup you have, some of these might be defined, like in my case, by our GitHub environment admins. So then the next part is, how can I get this enabled in my development environment? Now let me switch to VS Code in this case. I'm pretty sure, since it's one of the more popular development environments, that a lot of you are recognizing this interface, but if not, maybe you're a Visual Studio developer, and that's one of my next demos. So I'm here in VS Code and opened my GH-300 sample repo that I will use later on. But it's just my traditional development environment. So now I want to bring in Copilot. What we're going to do, and again, this is typical VS Code experience that has nothing to do with Copilot specifically. You would navigate to extensions, and in that long list of options, you would search for GitHub Copilot. Now, quite important here is that obviously the reason why I'm talking about this is you need to know out of this long list of matches with GitHub Copilot, which ones do I need to go for? The reason why we have so many of them is just because it's becoming more and more popular. I think that's the easy explanation for this. Now, you need to focus on these two first options. The first one is GitHub Copilot. There's a little bit of history there, and you can see there's a little information. I'll talk about it in a second. But historically, this was the first wave of GitHub Copilot, talking from like 4 years back now, where it would just allow you to do code completion, long before the full generative AI experience, and that's what you get with GitHub Copilot Chat. Now, up till a few weeks ago, you had to install those two components. The first one was checking your license plan. Do you have it enabled? What are all the settings? And then the second one is bringing in that chat experience into your VS Code. Where now, quite recently, you actually only need to install the first one. Now, I'm keeping it here. Why? Because you can still use the first option to get some pre-release version information. So if you're one of those developers or DevOps engineers trying to challenge yourself in your environment, playing with new preview features, then you might still need to install it. Once you install those two options, and obviously you can guess I already installed them just to make sure that they all work for the remaining demos that I have, it's going to show you the first time down here in your authentication options to validate your GitHub credentials, to again check like what kind of plan do you have, and also is it enabled out of your organization or business if you're not using the personal edition. Second thing that happens once you install this, let me close this, is now up here you got a little chat icon, and down here you have our GitHub Copilot friend waiting for you to watch over. When you move to the first option, it's going to open up your chat experience. I'm going to use this later on, so I'm not going to expand too much on everything that's happening, but I would say in my case, it's like literally my eye going to that right corner basically all day long as I'm in VS Code. Our little friend up here, and I'll make it again a little bit bigger, is what I call your statistic view. As you can see here, it's going to show you inline suggestions. Do you have that option available, yes or no? Where again, typically, why would you not have it, right? But maybe there's a good reason why within your organization somebody disabled that. You can look into chat messages, and then premium requests is pointing to actually one of our final modules, module 5 in this course, where we're going to talk about agents. It's good to know like where exactly throughout the month you can validate what is your consumption like. Because at some point, I'm pretty sure you're going to start loving the Copilot experience as much as I do. And it could be a little bit sad if you reach that 100%, like maybe not closer towards the end of the month. And that means you got to wait a little bit more. There's a few other things here, but already talked about it. If you click that workspace index, it's going to send you back to the GitHub portal where you can validate your features and settings. And then last, and honestly, I have no idea why you would disable it, but I'm pretty sure there's a good reason. You might disable the inline suggestions for specific files. In my case, I'm happy with it. I'm going to keep it for all my files. I'm going to accept the next edit suggestions that I'll talk about later on in another demo. And then maybe you also want to pause your GitHub Copilot experience for maybe a couple of minutes. I can imagine that if you're writing code, but then maybe it's some legacy framework where you don't want to use GitHub Copilot to help you and assist you, that's where maybe you want to keep everything up and running, but then disabling that experience. So that's, I would say, pretty much it here in my VS Code environment. But then also, although it's quite popular environment, I cannot assume that all of you watching the videos are now becoming VS Code developers or DevOps engineers. So I'm going to switch to the full-blown Visual Studio. And just to be clear, I'm using the latest version 2026, which got released pretty recently. A couple of different ways here again to install GitHub Copilot. The first option is navigating to Tools, Get Tools and Features, and that's going to start the Visual Studio installer, where it's going to validate a few things. And most probably out of that default install experience, it's probably already there. But up here, if you should not have it yet, you can search for GitHub. And you have GitHub Copilot. And yes, you have the GitHub themes similar to that view in VS Code. So the first 3 options in that long list of extensions. So that's one way to install it. Second approach is pretty close to what VS Code looks like. You move to Manage Extensions. Up here, you search for GitHub Copilot. And then once it resolves again, pretty long list, about the same list as what we had in VS Code. And you would again install these 2 little components. The third option is what I cannot really show you, but it's out of like the marketplace, or maybe your organization creates like pre-built development workstations where everything is magically happening behind the scenes. But those are like the prime 2 approaches on how to get the Copilot GitHub extension into your development environment. That's it for this first sequence of the demos. So with that, let's go back to the presentation. As shown in my demo environment, once it's getting enabled, we will use GitHub Copilot to interact with our code. But maybe we don't want it to interact with everything in the codebase repo. That's where content exclusions come in. Content exclusions in GitHub Copilot give organizations fine-grained control over what Copilot can and cannot learn from or reference. By excluding specific files, directories, or even entire repositories, teams can prevent sensitive or proprietary information from influencing code suggestions. When content is excluded, Copilot won't generate completions in those specific files, and that data won't be used to inform suggestions elsewhere. It's essential to understand the implications of these exclusions as well. While they help protect sensitive code, they can also reduce the relevance of suggestions in your chat or related files. Administrators can obviously configure exclusions, either at the repo level, organization level, really balancing productivity using security. The key benefit is confidence. Organizations maintain control of their code while leveraging AI assistance. When GitHub Copilot doesn't behave as expected, the issue is often related to setup, connectivity, or maybe something in the configuration. Missing code suggestions can usually be traced to problems, such as an unstable internet connection, maybe using outdated extensions, or maybe you try to push it in an unsupported development environment. Ensuring that the Copilot extension is up to date and properly getting authenticated is often the fastest first step. And then yes, in other cases, the solution lies in how prompts are getting written or how context is provided. Clear comments, meaningful variable names, and more specific instructions help Copilot generate high-quality suggestions. Troubleshooting Copilot isn't about fixing AI. It's about improving the signals that you as developers give it, which then leads to better results almost immediately. And then lastly, if GitHub Copilot license is not enabled or the token capacity limit has been reached, this could be why it's not working or it no longer works. Using AI effectively also means being intentional. Being intentional about managing risk. Governance frameworks help organizations like yours defining how AI tools like GitHub Copilot is getting used, but also monitored and reviewed. By applying policies, oversight, and clear accountability, teams can reduce unintended outcomes while still encouraging innovation. Responsible AI principles play a central role here, keeping humans in the loop, ensuring transparency, and maintaining ethical standards help organizations use AI safely and reliably. The benefit isn't just risk reduction. It's all about trust. When developers and leaders trust AI governance, adoption, and impact increases dramatically. Microsoft and GitHub anchor their AI strategy around 5 core responsible AI principles. There's fairness, reliability, and safety, together with privacy, security, inclusiveness, and transparency and accountability. These principles guide how GitHub Copilot is designed, was getting trained, is getting deployed, all this to ensure that AI systems behave consistently and responsibly. For organizations, these principles translate into practical safeguards. They help ensure that AI systems protect user data, operate reliably, and are understandable rather than opaque. By aligning Copilot with these standards, teams like yours can confidently integrate AI into your workflow while still supporting ethical and inclusive development practices. GitHub Copilot Business and Enterprise plans include important contractual protections that help organizations like yours manage legal and compliance concerns. One of the most notable is IP indemnity, which provides legal coverage if a Copilot suggestion is challenged as infringing on third-party intellectual property. The risk is shifted away from developers and now onto GitHub. In addition, GitHub provides transparency through its Data Protection Agreement, as well as the Trust Center. These resources explain how data is handled, how privacy is protected, and how compliance is maintained. Altogether, these protections allow organizations to adopt Copilot with greater confidence, knowing both legal and technical safeguards are in place. This brings me to my next demo, which focuses on how responsible AI principles are getting applied in practice. By exploring the GitHub Copilot Trust Center, I will show you where to find clear documentation on security, privacy, and compliance. The demo also highlights how administrators manage Copilot policies at the organizational level. This reinforces the idea that responsible AI isn't abstract, but it's operational. By configuring policies and reviewing trust resources, teams can actively govern how AI is used across the development environment. So we talked quite a lot about that responsible AI framework. So I think, as I mentioned in the presentation, it's a good time to show you a little bit more where you can actually find a lot more details than what I talked about during the presentation in that GitHub Trust Center. So the easiest way to find it is navigating to github.com/trust center. Now you might think like this looks a bit like a marketing webpage, but it's literally flagged by their legal team. Now the first one I would definitely recommend is you spending some time watching that video, where obviously I'm not going to play the video, it's online, you can go through this yourself, but actually scrolling down a little bit more, where the middle section is highlighting some of the core GitHub Copilot legal and responsible implications. From here, I want to focus on two different parts. The first part is allowing you to navigate, and I know this sounds a bit silly, but I talked about navigate to Trust Center, which again you find up here, but this is just the landing page. It's not the actual Trust Center where you find more detailed information. Although if you scroll down here, there's a set of frequently asked questions, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of this can already help you getting a better understanding of what that means, responsible AI that I talked about, and just finding more details. And again, keep in mind that this is like legal statements coming from the GitHub legal department. If you follow that other link to what I might call the actual GitHub Copilot Trust Center, I think this is where your security teams, your auditing teams, maybe your legal teams, right, are probably looking forward to. Why? Because this is where you find the actual technical details. So imagine you are an organization, you need to be SOX compliant, or you want to find out how GitHub Copilot as the tooling integrating in your environment is complying with ISO 27001 or any of the other ones. This is the place to go to. I don't have the time to go through all the details, but most important out of this demo was positioning the GitHub Copilot Trust Center, initially that landing page, and then remember navigating to that trust page. And I'll show it again a little bit bigger. So you could actually technically go straight into copilot.github.trust.page. And that's where you're going to find all those technical details. If you don't like reading through all this material, you could also go into the media tab, and then from here you got like short snackable videos touching on all the different responsible AI framework building blocks that I already talked about. Now from here, I'm going to take it back to my Copilot settings blade in my GitHub environment. And the story is not really different than what I showed you in one of the previous demos, but I want to highlight that some of those settings that I quickly talked about when I positioned my first demo, that we called features, I briefly talked about like, well, you can enable this, maybe you as an individual, you can disable this, but in the end, all of these are linked to the policies that we positioned as part of the presentation. Now, I don't have access to the enterprise level policies because I'm just a regular Microsoft employee and just a user of GitHub Copilot, but know that any of these feature options, where most of them luckily in my case are enabled, it allows me to just show you a lot of different things throughout the videos. But know that each and one of these are actually linked to policies. So if you go like, well, this is a cool feature that Peter showed in one of the demos, but it's not enabled in your environment, then maybe you need to talk to your organization or enterprise admins and maybe trying to convince them to enable that feature. That's pretty much it I wanted to share here in this part of the demo on our Trust Center Responsible AI. So let's go back to the presentation and wrap up this module. This concludes this specific module. We build a solid foundation in GitHub Copilot, understanding its plans, the setup, use cases, and governance features. We've seen how Copilot improves productivity, supports responsible AI practices, and integrates into real-world development workflows. Most importantly, I wanted you to understand how to use Copilot confidently and safely. By combining productivity gains with strong governance, troubleshooting skills, and responsible AI principles, you and your development and DevOps teams are well positioned to start adopting GitHub Copilot as your trusted development companion. There are many ways to continue your learning journey. I encourage you to watch other videos in this course or search for your next favorite topic on Microsoft Learn at aka.ms/learn. Thank you for being here with me for this first section. There is way much more to discuss, so I invite you to join me into the next module where I will cover several GitHub Copilot features you can use immediately in your own environment and development work. I see you back soon.